evening. Well, the Home Secretary Priti Patel has been in Rwanda today, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson at Lyd Airport in Kent, and he really gave a big speech today on illegal immigration, by far the biggest he's given since he became Prime Minister. Our Home Affairs and Security Editor, Mark White, was there. This is what he saw.
Entering Dover Harbour, the all-too-familiar sight of yet another Border Force vessel arriving here packed with would-be asylum seekers. Hundreds of people pulled from small boats in the middle of the English Channel. 28,500 last year alone, and already this year it's clear that record is set to be smashed. The Prime Minister, deeply frustrated by his government's inability to stem the flow of small boats, is now putting himself front and centre of those efforts, travelling to Kent to meet the teams at the sharp end as the Royal Navy takes over command and control of Channel operations. And in a major shift of policy, the announcement that most of those who arrive here illegally will be sent on a one-way journey to Rwanda after that African nation agreed a multi-million-pound deal with the UK.
So from today, our new migration and economic development partnership will mean that anyone entering the UK illegally, as well as those who have arrived illegally since January the 1st, may now be relocated to Rwanda. This innovative approach, driven by our shared humanitarian impulse and made possible by Brexit freedoms, will provide safe and legal routes for asylum.
4,000 miles from the UK, the Home Secretary was in the Rwandan capital to see the first in a series of new accommodation blocks being prepared to house the asylum seekers. Those sent here will be processed, and if they're granted asylum, their new life will be in this country. They won't be allowed to settle in the UK. The government is not planning to send women, children, or indeed married men to Rwanda, only single males. But that's still the vast majority of those arriving by small boats. Last year, 70% of small boat arrivals were single men. UK authorities are now operating a fleet of these drones over the Channel, and from today the Royal Navy takes over command of Channel operations. In the weeks ahead, these drones will be joined by Navy Wildcat helicopters and a fleet of new patrol boats. Human rights groups have already condemned the plans to send asylum seekers to Rwanda as cruel and inhumane. But one Border Force former senior manager believes it's the right thing to do.
Now they won't want to get into the hands of UK authorities because they won't want to go offshore to Rwanda. So the Navy will be able to intercept those people that don't want to be intercepted.
Any move to send asylum seekers to Rwanda could still be some way off, as it's inevitable human rights groups will seek to challenge it in the courts. In the meantime, as hundreds continue to arrive by small boat daily, the government says it's also planning to house asylum seekers in purpose-built accommodation centres, rather than spending the estimated £5 million a day to put them up in hotels across the country. Mark White, GB News, Kent.
Well, that was Mark White in Lyd today, and a very major speech from the Prime Minister, and of course, as I said earlier, the Home Secretary Priti Patel in Rwanda. So what do we make of it all? Well, I have to say, the reaction that I've had on the street from people today is, at last, they're doing something. And there are three big things they're doing. Number one, the Royal Navy are taking over operations in the English Channel. Number two, Linton on Ouse up in North Yorkshire is going to become a big reception centre and camp. But the really big one is that those young men that come here illegally will be sent to Rwanda and they'll be processed there. Now, what does all of this mean? It's important because the numbers that are coming are rocketing. 600 yesterday. Haven't got the official number for today, but I'm guessing it's about 500 indeed. As Boris Johnson was speaking, in a little village of Greatstone, about 3.5 miles away from Lydd Airport. At that very moment in time, a dinghy finished up on the sand, people going off into the village, and Border Force in the end going to pick them up. Ironically, whilst Boris Johnson was there, a similar distance away, the Dungeness lifeboat was on yet another shout out, and it broke down. So Boris, when he was there, saw a fair bit of chaos around him. It matters for lots of reasons. I could be very, very cynical and say to you the timing of all of this is because the local elections are coming up on May the 5th. I could be even more cynical and say it's because the first fine's been issued to the Prime Minister and there are more to come. But you know what? Tonight's programme, our special on the Crisis Simmer channel, is not about that. We want to actually understand what is really going on and whether it's going to work, because it strikes me that's important. Now, what do I think about this? Let's put it this way. If, and I think there is an if, but if we do see many hundreds of young undocumented males who've crossed the English Channel being flown off to Rwanda, that will, certainly in the short term, act as something of a deterrent. After all, why would you pay a trafficker €3,000, €5,000, whatever the going rate may be, if you thought, in short order, you'd finish up in Rwanda? After all, it's Treasure Island, isn't it, that you want to come to? So it could be effective in the short term. But here's my real worry and my real concern, and it's this. The Australians started off going down this route 10 years ago when the boats started coming from Indonesia, an offshore processing centre. But the problem was that within a couple of months, there were stories of abuse, there were stories of neglect, there were unpleasant tales coming out of those reception centres, and the whole world condemned Australia for being barbaric. There are already over 100,000 people in Rwanda in these type of centres that have come from other countries, and you can believe it or not, but some aid workers say conditions in those camps aren't great. All it would take is to hear of a couple of cases of abuse, of intimidation, and suddenly, yes, the lefty lawyers, as Boris likes to call them, the human rights lawyers, would be in action. And just think about it. You know, since the European Convention on Human Rights came into British law, it's difficult for us to even deport terrorists, let alone young men who we've no idea whether they have criminal records or not. It's going to be difficult. I can't see this in the long term working. I think Brexit hasn't actually been completed. I don't think until we leave the European Convention on Human Rights, till we leave the European Court, till we genuinely establish sovereignty over these issues, I don't think we'll be able to deal with this problem. I still think that actually in the end, we're simply going to have to pick people up on the channel, fingerprint them, try and find out who they are, and basically take them back to France, however much the French president screams and shouts. However, I'm going to raise half a cheer for the government today. They have at least done something, and it might, if they carry on with it, it might have a bit of a deterrent effect. I want to know, please, what you think. Send in your thoughts, farage@gbnews.uk. Now,